Okay, well, welcome everyone to the Big 12 Mental Health Roundtable. This is our opportunity as mental health providers for our Big 12 institutions to talk about things that are affecting our student athletes. So today we're going to focus in on stress and performance and talk about what we see and how we help our student athletes balance those things. So I'm Dr. Monique Marsh-Bell. I'm a clinical psychologist and the Assistant Athletic Director for Mental Health Services at Baylor University.
I'm Hannah Ashley. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm the Associate Director of Athletics Mental Health Services at Baylor University.
Hello, I'm Marty Martinez, counseling psychologist and sports psychologist at Iowa State University, and head up the sports psychology services.
I'm Dr. Annie Weiss, licensed psychologist and the Director of Mental Wellness and Sports Psychology for K-State Athletics.
And I'm Dr. Dana Charbonneau, licensed psychologist and our Director of Clinical and Sports Psychology here at West Virginia University.
All right, so let's jump in. It's about midway through the semester. We have more athletes in season because of how things have changed because of COVID. Midway through the semester also means that it's midterms. So our student athletes are having full schedules right now, dealing with academics and sports, and tend to be maybe dealing with a lot of stress. So what have you all seen from your student athletes that might be different this semester because of all the changes and some of them being in season and the spring when they typically aren't? Or just in general, what are some of the things that they're coming in for right now?
One thing I'm noticing this semester that maybe hasn't been the case in the past is our athletes had a 2-month break over the semester break. And I think that's a long time to be out of the normal rhythm of your daily life without the class expectation, the practice, the socializing. And I think it was a lot of time for maybe some poor sleeping habits to be created, or at least poor schedule maintenance. So from the get-go this semester, to get back in the rhythm, our athletes have reported feeling maybe more overwhelmed more quickly in the semester than in previous spring semesters. And for my spring athletes, like outdoor track, it has been over a year, almost 2 years since those athletes have competed. And so they're feeling some angst in different ways than they have in the past as well. But sleep has been a major concern with our athletes across the board.
Yeah, that's a good point, Annie. And looking back to that break, which was longer, which contributed to throwing things a little bit more off schedule. And we know that the athletes do really well with that kind of schedule, what they've had in the past, which would include, doing study tables and interacting with other athletes across sports and for social, for academic, for committees, and they're not doing that as much. And so one of the things I'm hearing from athletes, I'm scheduled to do this, I'm scheduled to do this, scheduled to this, and then I'm not getting as much sleep. And so what I'm not hearing this year as much as I would hear before is actually recognizing that sleep should be part of their schedule. And I'm scheduled to sleep at this time, which means here's how I prepare. And so a lot of my reminders the past couple of weeks has been the ways that they like to prepare for practice, like to prepare for a competition or an exam, how they're preparing for rest at the end of the night. And then they catch on and they remind themselves of that. But that definitely has been different this year.
And I'll piggyback off of that. I think that something that I'm seeing is for our student athletes who are used to only performing in the fall, who are now also performing in the spring, have an increased workload and school workload than they're used to, in addition to all of the practices and everything else. And so I've heard from multiple student athletes that sleep is almost one of their defense mechanisms. In the middle of the day, they'll just take a nap to wind down. And then that ends up increasing their stress levels because they're going to wake up and the stress hasn't diminished. It's just been put to the side. And so a lot of my conversations, have also been around how do we create a schedule when you're not used to managing all of these different things in this particular semester, but also how do we treat sleep appropriately and not just as something in the middle of the day that we're using to push our stress to the side, establishing a sleep routine at night and really getting back into that rhythm. And that's been difficult for a lot of the student athletes that I've worked with this semester.
Yeah, I think that whole idea of, I heard one of our administrators call it sprawl, like combining the spring and fall seasons in a different way now. But yeah, that's been really tricky for some of our folks who are now competing more in the spring, where maybe even though they were training and working out to some degree in the off season, there was still like more opportunities to recharge, or it just felt different. And so now it's almost feeling like we're having a season, then we have to prepare again for the fall season, and just almost like feeling we get that break and that recharge, and almost feeling overwhelmed with that right now. So seeing similar things there, and some of maybe performance pressures that come with, now I have to be ready in the spring too. I don't know what that's going to look like if I haven't experienced that in the past. And like Annie was saying, for some of our folks that are in season now and they haven't competed for like a year, again, just seeing some of those performance pressures right now, like, is my body ready? Is my mind ready, when my training leading up to this point looked different because of COVID?
I remember seeing last year, like, athletes sleep in the facilities. Like, we have some pretty comfortable waiting area chairs, and I would go out there and an athlete would just be asleep in the chair. Like, it's just found a place in the building to go to sleep. And so it made me realize like how often they are kind of taking naps and trying to catch these little opportunities to go to sleep, because at night, you know, sometimes they're not done with scheduled things to 8 or 9 o'clock. They get home, you know, or trying to eat dinner, or maybe still have some studying to do, and so they're up really late and then have to be at 5:45 or 6 a.m. workouts. And so I know for a lot of the athletes I talk to, there's this feeling like, oh, I'll sleep on the weekend, or I'll sleep later, or, you know, I'll kind of catch up on sleep, and they don't realize how it works. And surprisingly, a lot of them, I feel like, don't know how it affects their performance. And so I'm wondering what conversations you've had with athletes to help them understand the importance of sleep and the effect it has on their performance, both for their sport and for their academics.
Yeah, you mentioned the importance of it, and that is important. That is a significant thing for athletes when they value something, that they see it in a very different perspective. And one of the things I've done a couple of times is help them use sometimes when the gratitude approach, like for example, before performance, and they're very anxious, and to be able to kind of intentionally shift to how grateful they are to be out here to performing with this team in this very high caliber game, and shifting it to a place of gratitude of being out there and being in such a big game or match, and using that. And we talk about how about using that with sleep, of one of the last things you're doing in bed is thinking out loud or in your head, how grateful you are. And very tangible, athletes are very tangible for the bed you have, and the comfort, and the comforter, and the sheet, the flannel sheets in the winter. How grateful you are for this opportunity, and looking forward to whatever you have, whatever is there in the morning. And then before your feet hit the floor in the morning, saying something that you're grateful for the sleep, what you're looking forward to that day, or what you have that day. And several athletes have reported that to be very helpful, particularly if they've already used that in practices and performances.
Something I talk about too is just how sleep is kind of your number one performance enhancer, at least how I talk about it like that, and kind of helping open up a conversation again about how sleep is actually a very active and not a passive process. And I this passive thing where I'm shutting my
Yeah,
eyes and like
yeah,
gets put on the back burner, right? Of the thing that I don't have to prioritize, but to really help break it down with them, like all the things that are happening while you're sleeping and how that does kind of help or hinder you the next day. And if there are concerns they're bringing up, we can talk about like how sleep might be playing a part of that, or if they've had really good performances and kind of thinking about, well, how were you sleeping that week or the night before and stuff like that. But I think what's also just tricky in our role is there's an individual factor with sleep, but there's also like a systemic factor and an environmental factor with, like Monique was saying, based on the limitations that are put on them with what do I still have going on up until 8 or 9 at night that are requirements of mine that I have is my training, my lift, my practice the next morning. So we also have to find ways to meet our athletes, you know, halfway, where if I'm saying, well, you need 9 or 10 hours, but if I actually looked at their schedule, that's kind of impossible for them to get. There's just going to be a mismatch there. And our relationship is going to be hindered as a result because I'm not understanding like the context of their experience, right? So I think it's helpful for us to be thinking about ways that we can maximize the quality of their sleep as best as we can given their schedule, and kind of help them understand more of like prioritizing that sleep process for them and their sleep hygiene, and like how are you kind of winding down at night, and putting yourself in a situation that's going to help you get the best restful sleep you can get given those constraints. And then if you are in a place where napping works for you, like how can we be effective with our naps and our times that we recharge the next day as well?
I talk about, in addition to some of those things, I talk about what are the best of the best doing? What are the Olympic athletes prioritizing? What's LeBron James' sleep routine like? And I think that maybe gets their attention in a little different way. Also, Dana, you brought up their schedule, and I'll have my athlete, we work on they all have this teamwork scheduling thing, and we'll put in sleep prep, wind down, phone off, like into their schedule. So they're getting the reminders, they're seeing it visually. And we can really collect some good data about how were you functioning this week? Did you stick to the schedule? What were the barriers? But if they see it in there on their schedule, just like practices, just like tutor time is, it sometimes helps them make it a more important priority in their lives.
Annie, I love that idea. We have Teamworks as well, and I frequently do the scheduling with them. We talk about sleep hygiene. I do a printout, which is maybe a little bit old school. And so putting it in their Teamworks will also connect it to our calendar to where we're reminded, hey, after session, this needs to translate over and can be a part of our continued conversations. And just in addition to what y'all have said, I think that one of the most surprising things in my conversations has been talking about the research around this. And I think student athletes are just unaware at times of how it can affect performance. And so even looking at, this is affecting memory, this is affecting accuracy and reaction times and all of these other things, which translate not just to performance in sport, but also in school performance as well. And so just giving that education around this is why this is a part of our conversations as well. If this is a piece of a goal that you're trying to reach, let's look at how this is actually on paper also potentially affecting these things that you're hoping to achieve. So it's been interesting to have those conversations and then ask questions about, oh my gosh, I had no idea what else is this impacting in my life. So, but I love that idea, Annie.
And Hannah, I think that research is also helpful when we're talking to coaches and when we're talking to athletic trainers. I think if we could teach them how important sleep is, hey coach, do you want to have a really effective, awesome 1 hour long practice, or do you want to drag this out 2 hours? Let's get your athletes caught up on sleep, rested, and let's see how more effective and efficient practices can be.
Yeah, it's always surprising to me how athletes sometimes don't know the basic like sleep hygiene things. And so they're on their phone while they're in the bed. They're using their bed as like their desk and where they're eating. And it's not set at a good cool temperature, like just some of the basic stuff. And so that's one of the things, along with the research, I do that too and tell them about how, the less sleep they're getting, the more likely they are to have injuries. For football, I talk to them the connection with concussions. And so sometimes that stuff's really eye-opening for them. And like Marty said, they learn the value of sleep and how it affects their performance. And I know that I'm old school too. I do a paper sleep log, so maybe I need to look into an app for that so I can connect with them. But after doing that sleep log, when I have them bring it back in, we talk, like Dana said, about, okay, what days were also the best practices? What days were also the days that you felt like you had the most energy, and let's look at how your sleep and your sleep routine that night compared to what happened that day. So yeah, their schedules are really hectic, and often they're not getting the amount of sleep that they need. And I don't want to give props to a SEC school, but when LSU redid their locker room, their football locker room, you know, they had sleep pods in there, which at first I was like, wow. But then I was like, wow, that's a great idea, because sometimes, you know, they're there at the facility, and if they can catch an hour nap, it'll really help in their performance. What other performance issues do your athletes come in with, or things that they feel like are affecting their performance, or have you seen that affects their performance?
I'm overall kind of seeing just this difficulty with attention and focus, which of course is highly highly related to sleep quality and quantity. And injuries is a big one that I'm seeing also. So just being sidelined, not even being able to work on performance. But I think sleep trickles down and wellness trickles down with also into confidence, not feeling confident on the field or the court or whatever it might be. And when we really dig into that confidence issue, it's when I'm distracted. I have low energy, I have low motivation, and all of that obviously is correlated with sleep.
I think just stress in general is something that has been a theme in managing, like I mentioned before, all of the responsibilities that they have. And a lot of my conversations have been, and again, Annie, yes, injuries as well. My conversations have been around how stress can impact all of those different things. And, you know, if the higher levels of stress that you have, the more likely you are to experience an injury. And this semester and this year, student athletes have been at home more often than usual with quarantine and isolation, and many of them having to do that on multiple occasions. And that affects sleep often because their desk is their bed, or they just don't have the space to be able to, you know, get outside and take a breath and really utilize some of the stress management techniques that they might be used to. And so a lot of what I am manage my stress in this new type of environment that everybody's trying to adapt to. So.
Yeah, I think there's still some just ongoing pandemic fatigue, and like when that's hitting folks at certain times of just being annoyed with where we're at still with all of this, and how that's playing out for them. But kind of like what I said earlier too, I'm just seeing a lot more like performance pressure when folks are coming back in and maybe questioning confidence and if I'm ready, and what the coaches are expecting of us based on the training that we've put in. And then with that, like more outcome focused, like thoughts and concerns, like focusing more on like individual times or like indicators for them where maybe they're comparing to like previous performances when their training also looked a lot different, their preparation looked a lot different, but they're like expecting themselves to be similar to that point in the past, and having to like get back to that present focus of where I'm at now and how we can kind of trust in that process for them. I think they're getting caught up in some of those future concerns or comparing to the past.
Yeah, that emphasis that a little seems a little easier to slide into, of that outcome focus as opposed to the process focus of what they are doing and preparing for. Um, a lot of times, sometimes athletes will kind of cross over two words that are very, very different, and that is uncertainty, and how athletes deal with uncertainty. A lot more uncertainties the past year, um, and allowing that to trigger what they are certain of. Again, the process, the preparation, the readiness, the commitment. But oftentimes, what athletes will do or can do is they allow uncertainty to shift to doubt. If I'm uncertain about something, then I'm doubtful about it, can lead to kind of a sense of fear, which is a diminishing, of course, of their sense of confidence, as you were talking about, Annie. So really helping them distinguish between doubt and natural uncertainty, which leads to the certainty of the process.
Just thinking of the overall stress that they're under from day to day, a lot of times it just creates the next level, which is the feelings of anxiety, sometimes symptoms of depression. And I know that sometimes when that happens, our student athletes don't always cope in the best manner. And sometimes they start using substances as a way to cope with the pressure that they feel or the anxiety that they're experiencing or the fact that they feel sad all the time and don't really know why. And so a lot of times we have to have the discussion around how that's not helpful and why it's not helpful, the fact that they're putting their career at risk. And I know for some of them, it's been something that they've been using and they feel like it's working. And so it's a difficult conversation sometimes to have about, hey, let's try therapy, let's try other mechanisms to decrease that anxiety, to raise your confidence. So you don't feel like you have to use that. So I don't know, have others seen that?
Indeed, indeed. It's like, uh, you know, respecting the need, that they so much are aware of what their body's doing and the messages they're getting from their body and ways that kind of help the body again, like reducing pain and whatever they're taking from the trainer or they're taking on their own, you know, um, just this really sensitivity they have to what their body's saying and doing, but really almost sometimes what I call really pulling out again a performance enhancer. I love that term, Dana. Like I'm going to use that more. Performance enhancer is really not just positive thinking, but positive positive neurology, which is again back to that term. For example, gratitude. When we're really focused on gratitude, research has shown that it is the ideal state that the body can be in of levels of serotonin and dopamine and endorphins and oxytocin, and it's the ideal state. And how we think and view life um, changes our neurotransmitter levels, which is so much more powerful and impactful and healthy than some of the other things that they're using. Why settle for something that is less effective? Um, Put in the work to do what your body naturally can do.
I mean, I've certainly seen, we identified that some of the things we're seeing affecting performance are stress and injury. And as I'm doing assessments with our student athletes who might have tested positive on one of our drug times, they're telling me that this is helping with pain management and this is helping with stress management. And just even in relationships back home that are causing stress, not even related to sport. And oftentimes what I'm hearing is it helps me to be better and more calm and kind of avoid what is actually going on in my body, what I'm feeling. And so I've had a lot of conversations about, what it looks like to start weaning off of something you've been using for most of your life to deal with this. And we also have a really great therapist who comes over and helps with that with some of our student athletes and has conversations around that as well. But this is certainly something that I have seen really consistently being utilized to just not deal with the stress, the anxiety, the depression, the pain, and everything else going on with these student athletes.
Yeah, I think there is a difference there between some of our student athletes who maybe we've been working with and they have been using for a while versus some of them that are just picking up some new habits, maybe because of this new stress that they're experiencing and kind of trying some new things. So I think if it's more related to kind of a newer behavior that's been developed, it's still always interesting to explore like the motivations behind that. Because if it is truly like I'm really wanting to find this way to help me get through this tough time and everything, then it does open up a conversation of what else have you tried? Like, have we been meeting regularly? All those kinds of other things to kind of get some buy-in for maybe exploring other options in a way that's not coming down harsh and obviously going to like lose their interest in continuing to talk to us, but kind of meeting with them where they're at and being able to like look at the the bigger picture for what they're hoping for themselves with their performance and their academic success and everything else, and just seeing if some of these behaviors and the pros and cons of them seem aligned with what they want to see for themselves. So always like interested in just opening up that conversation. And then, yeah, it's really tough for some of our athletes who have been using for years. And if we're just going to all of a sudden say, stop doing that, like sometimes the negative impact in terms of emotionally what's going to come up if we're taking away some of what's been serving to kind of counteract some of that is going to feel terrifying and is going to feel really uncomfortable. And so it's a tricky place for us to figure out how do we help them with that process without just ripping that away from them or kind of having them jump in the deep end, so to speak, without some of that support in place at the same time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because I mean, that's a process, and we have to help them find new ways of coping and new ways of dealing. And a lot of times, they don't want to do that mid-season or when they're getting ready to enter season, they want to do what they know works. And so, and again, like sometimes it's hard for me, at least, sometimes I find it hard to help them see the negative effects when this is all they've known, this has been their normal, and it feels like it's been working fine this long. So why would I need to do anything different? The other thought I had about just performance and pressure is like, I know all of our basketball teams are headed to the tournament, and this is going to be a bubble situation for them. And so I was doing some research for some of our teams and just trying to help them figure out how they're going to mentally cope, because unlike the NBA, they are not going to be at the happiest place on earth. Like they're not going to be at Disney. And it's going to be really mentally tough for them to be able to maintain some mental stability and still perform at their best when they're kind of in these bubbles that they're in around the tournaments that are coming up. So I'm wondering, has anyone else talked with their athletes about the stress that comes from that and how it affects their performance, not just the basketball teams too, but the other teams that are in these bubbles that they're in?
A little bit like how sometimes uncertainty can be allowed to move toward a doubt when you're adding on maybe some other kind of concerns or issues. Same thing, that energy level goes up. Energy level goes up at conference time, at Big 12 or at NCAA times when you're being sequestered, or energy level goes up. Schedules change and energy level goes up. And so I use that term energy level, which oftentimes athletes are more receptive to than the word stress. I'm feeling more stressed. So you're aware, you're experiencing more energy, and one that's good to be that increases awareness of what I want to do with that energy, how to use pieces of that energy now, how to store that energy for practices and games. And so sometimes that reconceptualization really is helpful, that because of that, in fact, what feels like additional energy is the type of energy that works perfectly during this long haul of many games in conference and in NCAA. That additional energy is your body's reminder that you're preparing and you're prepared for the games ahead.
And to be honest, at this point, I almost feel like some of our athletes that are at a point where they're like, well, I've done it for this long, I can keep going a little bit further even. When we just think about how long some of them have been kind of restricted to spending time with just their team or training in pods and things like that. I think for some of them, they are getting to that point where it's like, well, I'm kind of used to it right now. So I can go a little bit longer.
Yeah, I know we've talked throughout a little bit about like the motivation being their sport, but we all know that we have some athletes that the motivation is really their academics. Like they are skilled at their sport, and because of that, they've used it as an avenue to come to college and to get the degree that they want, to pursue the career that they want that is not related to their sports. And so I'm wondering how maybe you've heard athletes talk about, or how they stay motivated in their sport when sometimes like that's not really their motivation. I mean, I know I've had athletes be like, I want to be able to study for this test longer, but I can't because I have to go to practice. And And so sometimes like just that is also a source of stress and definitely affects their performance because it's not the thing that is motivating them.
I think conversations that I've had around that and some of the things that I have heard are really that is really their priority, that they know that sport is an important driving factor to get, to what they ultimately want to accomplish in their goals for academics. And so even though they don't necessarily want to spend as 8-hour days or however long they're spending doing workouts and everything else that they're doing, they know that it's a piece of what's necessary in order to get to that end goal. And so while it has been something that I have heard has been a stressor or something that drives up energy levels, it still is a motivating factor in that it is getting them to that end goal. And so that's what my conversations have been, that yes, academics is important. And yes, this is a stressful area, but I also know that it's what's required to ultimately keep my scholarship or to be able to go on to the next level and go to grad school or whatever that might be.
I always think it's helpful just to break down what they're doing in terms of their values again too, and just seeing like aspects of their values that play out in those different areas. And so even if like on the surface with some of the things that come with participating in my sport that I'm not maybe enjoying all the time right now, or there's still aspects in terms of like whether it's my work ethic or other aspects that tie into my values that I can still kind of use to help motivate me and to see the overlap like with my academics, and is one area still helping the other, even if there are aspects of either or both that I don't always enjoy, and kind of like helping tie that into motivation.
One of the, again, I seem to be kind of falling on terminology, which tends to be helpful in focusing for the athletes. Where on the two-sided coin, where what they're recognizing is the quantity of time that they have to study is less than they would like. And being able to acknowledge that, really even grieve that a little bit, and the opportunity to really lean on the other side, which is quality, and the commitment to that the time that they do have, how to make that as qualitatively purposeful as they can. And I remind them how good they are in doing that in practices in their games, and focus on the quality of every play, and that they get to do that now with the time they have for their study.
Yeah, I also talk to them about how this is a part of real life because there'll be parts of your job that you won't get excited about, and there'll be parts of your job that you're like, ugh, I wish I could avoid doing that. But you do it because there are parts of your job that you love and it's your passion. And it's why you want to be there. So they want to be there for the academics. They love that. They know how that's going to help them. There's parts of their job that maybe is weights that they're not so in love with. But there's no perfect picture. So, and sometimes I even share with them, there's parts of my job that I'm not thrilled about sometimes, but that's what I have to do because I love all the other parts of my job. So, yeah. Any last thoughts on stress and performance, or any tips for athletes or anything as we wrap up?
Certainly, good luck. Wishing them well, and the awareness that some of the best performances that athletes have is typically at the end. At the end of their season, as some seasons are coming, as we're closing in on, say, basketball, and that keeping their focus and their motivation and their sense of purpose greatly overrides, and that at the end of the season, people are not physically at 100%. But most of the greatest performances come at the end of seasons, come in the Olympics, come in, NCAA championships, and because the focus and the intensity and the motivation are so high. And yeah, good luck. Good luck with that.
Just continuing to find those nuggets of recharge and connection as we continue on in the second half of the semester, even if it's not ideal, just finding those little points that they can still kind of get a little bit of that refueling in.
Yeah, this week for us would have been spring break. But we're not getting a spring break. And so I've definitely been talking to them about, like you said, Dana, kind of finding those opportunities to recharge and being very intentional about their self-care and their mental health and managing their stress and learning new ways to cope. I tell them that it can be voluntary or it can eventually be involuntary if you keep ignoring it. And so just learning ways to better do that so they can make it through the remainder of the semester and then really hopefully have a break for a while before it starts all over again. So well, thank you all for being here for this conversation about stress and performance and other things that affect our student athletes' performance. I know for me, I'm not a sports psychologist, I'm a clinical psychologist, but I'm often in the position where I'm trying to help our athletes that are struggling with their performance figure out how to improve it. So I appreciate you all sharing your knowledge, and we'll see you again next time.
Thanks, Monique.